It is. Thank you very much, everybody. Apologize for the 3-minute delay. I am super excited to be giving this talk because while I do Postgres for a living, this is probably one of the more interesting things that I do when I'm not working. My name is Bruce Momjian. I'm one of the Postgres core team members. I gave a couple talks on Thursday and Friday at the sort of Postgres mini conference we had before Scale started. And I've really enjoyed it. I like the new venue. I think it's really nice. Pasadena is a wonderful, wonderful town, and walking around, and restaurants and everything. It's really nice, really nice. So again, normally I do stuff with Postgres. I work for Enterprise DB, but this is actually about home automation, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart. I hope that comes across to you. We do have 73 slides, so I'm going to chug along a little bit. But the slides are actually available to you right now. If you go to that website right there and you pull down those slides, it's under presentations, I think general subcategory. You can actually read the slides whenever you like. In fact, there's probably 30 or 40 presentations all on that website, all as PDFs. So feel free to take a look. A lot of them have videos as well. You can actually watch videos of me doing the talks. But again, we're here to talk about home automation, and I think it's really interesting. What I'm hoping to do today is to give you a background, not only of some of the technical aspects of home automation, but the technical aspects are actually not the hardest part. Personally, I think the hardest part is figuring out how to integrate technology with your home life, with the people who are in your household, and doing that in a successful way. I know there's a lot of talk about the Internet of Things and all these new light bulbs that are Wi-Fi enabled and stuff, and that's interesting, but one of the concepts I'm going to go along here is that technology in home automation space has been around for a long time. It hasn't been as good as it is now, but it's been around for a long time. And we've still found it challenging to really get across and make home automation sort of a general purpose thing that families and households use. I'm going to be giving some data to that. I'll show you some articles that have been recently published on this issue to give you sort of a framework. But if you're approaching the home automation problem thinking it's a technology problem, you're probably going to want to think about that again when you're done this talk, because I'm going to highlight what I think are the real barriers to home automation. In many cases, they are not technological. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is computerized automation, what actually is that. We're going to evaluate some technologies, specifically the technology that I've used in my home for over 10 years. But again, it's just a sample technology. We'll look at a sample deployment, particularly my household, which has grown steadily over the years. We'll talk a little bit about device programming and what's basically involved there. And then we're going to talk about what is success. That's actually where we start to talk about, well, what are we trying to do here? What are our goals? And then finally, we'll talk about, sorry. Oh, that's right. I'm just not used to the microphone being way up there. Does everyone hear me in the back? Are you good? Great. Okay, just checking. And then finally, we're going to talk about 12 home automation applications, particularly cases where I wanted to do home automation and how I solved them. Okay? Do I think you're going to use any of the applications that I actually specify? Probably not. But the goal is that you're going to have gone through a case with somebody who's gone through it, and then you can sort of apply those as you go. So be prepared once you're done this talk to kind of go home, spend a day, a couple days, and you're sitting, in your backyard and thinking, I heard that home automation talk a couple days ago. I wonder if I could X. And that's usually the way it happens. I've gone to home automation talks before, and I sort of get ideas that kind of percolate in my head, and then I kind of like grasp onto them when I see a use case right away in front of me in my household. Okay? I'm going to take questions as we go because I think it's hard for you to remember them, and I think it's more interesting to have you answering the questions sort of as we kind of chug along. So feel free to sort of raise your hand. We'll be doing that. Okay? So let's get started. Let me do that and that. There we go. So what is computerized home automation? First off, we have to talk about what it isn't. What isn't computerized home automation? Timers, the timer that has like the dial you plug in and you stick the plug in, right? It's automation, but it's not really computerized. I think we can all kind of agree on that. The clapper, maybe I'm showing my age here, but maybe I'm not showing my age because everyone's seen the YouTube hilarious video about it. So anyway, it's just kind of it's not really computerized. Dusk-on sensors, similar. Again, a lot of people, it's automation, it's not computerized. And motion sensors. Again, these are fairly widely deployed, particularly in outdoor applications, and again, they're not computerized. What is computerized? Cases where device behavior can be combined. Think of programmatic inputs, okay? The idea of not having a distance limitation. There's a lot of cases you're going to see here where the sensor's in one place and the action you want to have happen is somewhere else, okay? That's not true of a dusk-on sensor. That's not true of a motion sensor. In those cases, the sensor and the action are right next to each other. When they're separated, then you have a challenge. You've got to get something controlling all that. You've got to get one sensor to be sensed and then send information to some other remote sensor. That's where it gets kind of interesting. Activity detection, another thing, again, usually distance. It should be fully programmable and scriptable. At least I would like that, not necessarily a requirement. And it should have access to external data. I'm showing you some examples of that, where you can pull data off the internet and have activities behave based on data you've gotten from the internet. Okay? Any questions? Okay. So let's talk about home technologies. Again, we got 7 sections or 6 sections, right? So let's talk, I sort of alluded to this just a minute ago, the idea of having the sensor in one place and the action somewhere else, okay? That's a challenge. Again, motion sensor, you put the motion into the bulb, somebody moves, the bulb goes on. Not really programmable, not really controllable. It works, assuming the sensor and the activity are right next to each other, but a lot of times they aren't. And if they aren't, you have to have some type of way of these things communicating. So I think in good home automation systems, you have some type of network that can actually control things and kind of harmoniously kind of set things up. Now, this is a little awkward. You're used to thinking of networks as like Ethernet and maybe wireless, 802.11, Wi-Fi, but there are some other networks that are available in your home, and you should be aware of them. Don't sort of get stuck on the fact that I only want to put in 802.11 Wi-Fi devices in my home. There are a lot of limitations to those in terms of cost, in terms of what they can do, in terms of sophistication and how hard they are to configure. So don't get stuck on, I only want to have 802.11 devices because it'll limit what you can do, okay? So what networks do we have in our home? Well, a lot of people aren't willing to rewire their entire home to get started with home automation. I'll explain why that's unrealistic in a minute. But effectively, you already have some networks. First, you've got the telephone. Is the telephone a network in your house? Yes, it is. If I pick up one phone, my wife picks up another one, we can talk, right? Yeah, it's kind of awkward. I'll hear the dial tone while I'm talking to her, but it is a network, okay? In fact, you might want to think of it more as a network that reaches out into the rest of the world. And this is not necessarily one phone to another within your house, but it is a connection to a data network to some extent. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. Cordless telephone frequencies, 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, 5.8, 1.9. These are all networks that are available in your phone. And some of the Wi-Fi protocols, in fact, do use these frequencies. They may not be the same frequencies 802.11, or they may not use the same protocol as 802.11, but they are networks. So realize that you have wireless frequency all over your house. That also can be used for communication. You may have wired internet in your house. Good for you. I have a little bit of it. I run Ethernet actually over some of my coax that used to be used for cable television. So there's that option there, coax or some type of Ethernet in your home. And of course, 802.11 Wi-Fi is available. That's network. Your electrical system is actually a network. I'll show you an example of that. You might not think that's true. And of course, we have new wireless networks available. Okay. So let's take a look at sort of some of the standard ones out here. And these are a little, this is not an exhaustive list. So if you go to some of these URLs here at the bottom, it would give you a better list of all of the networks that are available in your house. One of them that I happen to use is power line control. So it makes your electrical system a network. There are some advantages to that. There are a large number of disadvantages, so you may not want to go that direction. There's Z-Wave, which runs on the 900 megahertz band. That's very similar to the 900 megahertz I've listed right here for cordless phones. In fact, it uses the same network. Zigbee, same thing, runs on 900, runs on 2.4. It is an IEEE standard, so the nice thing about Zigbee is that, they both start with Z, Z-Wave, Zigbee, but the nice thing about Zigbee is that it is more of an open standard in terms of allowing devices to communicate with each other. Okay, and then there's some hybrid ones. There's Insteon. That's actually too loud, isn't it? So I'm going to move that back there. Sorry about that. I was just worried. So again, just think about the networks that you have in your house and how you're going to use it. You might want to standardize on one network type. There are some very creative hubs that are now being produced which actually communicate with several different networks. So you'll get a hub from somebody. I know Staples sells one, and there's a bunch of others where it's basically a home automation center, and it does 802.11, it does Z-Wave, it does Zigbee, it may do X10, it may do Insteon. Okay. So the idea is that you might decide that you want a hybrid network in your house. You can't buy all the devices you want to use the same protocol, so therefore you buy some kind of hub that sort of synchronizes all that together. Okay? So just keep aware of, because there's a lot of devices that only are available in one, like for example, door locks. I think they're only like Zigbee or Z-Wave, right? And there's other things that are only X10, or some things that are only Insteon. So if you're in that type of environment, either you have to have some kind of central server that understands all those at once, or you're going to have to buy a hub that understands all those protocols and then program everything within that hub and let that hub communicate. Any questions so far? Okay. Choosing a home network technology. So again, I've listed a bunch of them. There's a bunch more that are coming out all the time. Some of them are proprietary. They don't even have really, household names. But you have to think of a couple things. You have to think of, do you have open source computer control of this protocol? Okay, if it's a closed source protocol, you may not have a way of communicating from Linux or from BSD or from an open source operating system into these protocols. And if you don't, that means that effectively you're locked into using the software that comes from that vendor, and you're also locked into being able to interoperate that particular protocol with another protocol that's available. So be aware of that kind of trap. You want to try and find something that is open. Pretty much everything Mr. House supports, which is written in Perl, is probably going to be good for you. So if you go to Mr. House, and you can actually, it's been around for probably 15 years, they have a whole bunch of protocols that they understand, and that's actually an example of a tool that actually can integrate a whole bunch of different technologies together and give you a single platform upon which you can program. Okay? You have to think also of what type of devices do you want. I already mentioned door locks is something you might want, and you might find that those only supported on certain protocols. You may find that you want to control like lamps. That's a pretty basic one. Turn the lamp off, dim it. You might find that you want chimes as part of your case. You might find you need wireless remotes that allow you to turn lights on and off without actually going to the light. You might want sensors. You might want HVAC thermostat type of controls. You may want 220 voltage controls. Okay? So you want to try and get an idea of what devices you think you're going to need, and then look at the protocol you choose and try and get one that hopefully supports most of the type of devices that you're going to use. And if not, you have to realize that you're going to have to bridge networks. You're going to have to get some kind of central hub to kind of bring all those networks together. It would be wonderful if we had one home automation system, one protocol, but there's a whole bunch of reasons that we don't. X10 years ago, probably 30 years ago, was hoping to be that. It's been around since the mid-'80s. Again, as I was saying, home automation is not like brand new. We thought, it's like, home automation is always 5 years away. So in 5 years, it's going to be 5 years away again. That's effectively the way a lot of us who have been on home automation, because the technological problems are really have been surmounted long ago. It's really more of the sociological problems and psychological problems you have to deal with, and that's I'm going to go into in a minute. Simplicity of device replacement. I know a lot of new homes sometimes get a built-in home automation system that's built into the home. Does anyone have one of those? Does anyone want to admit to having one of those? And the reason I say that is because I have talked to a number of people who had pre-built home automation systems in their home, and the problem has been one of reliability, the ability to expand as technology expands, and the complexity of programming these devices, and the cost. So unfortunately, a lot of pre-built systems, which have basically been in the home automatically when they purchased it, often within a couple of years have fallen into disuse because they kind of had a very rigid structure. They weren't able to change technologies. They were very complicated. They were often very proprietary, very off the shelf, very customized. But again, the more customized, the less testing that's going on. And if you had to change the way anything behaved, you had to bring in somebody to reprogram it. And obviously that was a big kind of detriment to people sort of doing things with home automation. Just to sort of step back a minute, home automation seems to be fine in like automobiles. Like, you drive an automobile, it has a whole bunch of technology in it, right? Why can't I have that same technology in my house? Well, the reason is because a car comes as a closed system. You buy that car, you drive it off the lot. Every single part in that car is made to work with every other single part in that car. You probably have the car for 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years, okay? And you don't live in the car, right? So you're not worried of it like locking the doors and you can't get out or something. Like you're not assuming your car has the same requirements of safety and sort of predictability, I think, maybe than a house does. For a house, you figure it's going to last 70 years, 100 years. Technology is going to change over that time. A house is not necessarily a technological vehicle, so you don't think of technology as sort of being part of it. So it's kind of weird when you think of automobiles that they've been able to move in terms of automation very quickly because they are a closed system that comes pre-tested. Home automation, by definition, is always a one-off, and that's made it very, very hard for people to effectively get any kind of hold or momentum in this industry. Cost I talked about, that's a big factor. If you have to go to your spouse every time you want to add a light going on and off, and it's going to cost you $80, you're going to have a conversation, okay? I don't know about your wife, but my wife used to, I probably have, I don't know, 40, 30, 70, 50 devices in the house at different places, okay? If that was all $80, it'd be like, my wife kind of jokes I got a little like, X10 warehouse in the basement. And the reason for that is because when you buy things, I have a tendency to buy a couple, I'll leave them in the box, and then when somebody needs something, I can go down to the box, pull it out, and install it right away. And I don't have to wait for, shipping and pay shipping and so forth. So I have a tendency to have a little extra bit of stuff around, and that's how it gets to be joked. But the items are not that expensive, so it's really kind of easy to have a couple extra around. Again, as you get into the hundreds of dollars per device cost, then you're like, then you're going to really be thinking. And again, there's a lot of buzz about this. The home automation is really a subset of the Internet of Things. It's the Internet of Things sort of brought into the home. I think the jury's still out on what it's going to look like 5 or 10 years from now. I would have thought that home automation would have been here 5 years ago. So, my prediction is completely useless because I assumed once the technology was available that it would be used very widely. And in fact, when I give presentations, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. There's usually a very small number of people in the audience who are actually actively doing home automation. And there's a number of stumbling blocks, and I'm going to cover those. Okay? Let's just take a look at a sample deployment. I'm going to go through these slides really quickly. I started my home automation probably 2003, 2004, so maybe 11, 12 years ago. At that time, most of the devices that are available today for home automation were not available. The only real sort of basic home automation thing was something called X10. It was very inexpensive. It was also fairly unreliable. But I figured out how to use it. Effectively, what it does is it makes your electrical system into a network. Sounds crazy, but effectively the way they do it is in a standard AC house, they actually have a little spike of frequency that they send at the point where the phase crosses the center line, and they can basically send a 1 or a 0 that way. Sounds really crazy. You can only do 120 bits a second because the cycle's like 60 hertz and it crosses twice, so really slow in terms of capability. But if you only got like, 30, 40 devices, and all you have to do is say on or off, it's not that bad. Again, you're not pushing a lot of data through there to basically say that device I want to turn on, that device I want to dim. This is a little bigger example, and again, some of the codes. X10 will support under 256 devices. I'm not suggesting X10, I'm just giving it as an example. There's the sine wave on the oscilloscope. That's what it looks like when it sends a 1, basically. Okay. So X10 standard, this is very sobering for me. Designed in 1975. I can tell you when they designed this, they thought this was going to take over the world. And you know how many people really use it today? Probably like 0.001%, if that. Again, there's a packet and a protocol and so forth. There's all sorts of problems with phases and amplifiers that allow you to bring the phases together. You don't have to be an electrical engineer to do this, but you have to have some kind of engineering smarts to kind of set it up in a reliable way, particularly in a large home. But the nice thing is the devices are fairly cheap. They're roughly $10, maybe $15 a piece. They look pretty normal. Here, for example, on the right is a normal switch. On the left is an X10 switch. And you'll notice it's a button because there's no definition of on or off. It can be turned on and off electrically or electronically. So instead of flipping it up and down, you just press it. This happens to be for an outside light. This is a flat switch, a decor switch they call it. They have three-way switches. This is a wireless switch. It's kind of weird. This is how I got started with home automation. I had an electrician in the house, and I said, my wife wants a switch right here to control the light over there. He's like, whoa, well, okay. The problem is the switch, you want the switch on the second floor, but the light is in the ceiling of the first floor. If I have to run the wire down and over to that thing in the middle of the ceiling, I'm going to make a whole bunch of holes. And it's not going to go well. I don't think you want to do that. He said, you can try X10. I'm like, what's that? I've heard of it, but I don't know. Like, I remember the obnoxious X10 marketing. That's all I knew. Yeah, so a couple people remember that. I think it was the first pop-up ad, believe it or not. But in fact, that's what it was. That is a switch that will send a 900 hertz signal to a receiver, which then will send a signal across the electrical network to a switch that actually controls the light. So it allows you to basically stick a switch anywhere. It's kind of interesting. That's what the receiver looks like. So this sends an 900 megahertz signal, picks up by the receiver. The receiver sends it through the electrical plug, through the electrical network in the house. The switch, which actually controls that light, also is an X10 switch, like that one, like that one, and it will turn the light on. Kind of cool. You can have a remote. That's kind of cool. I'll show you an example of why I use that. You can have multi-key remotes. That's a big button on the bottom there. I won't go into that. This is an interesting case. When I bought my house, we had one of those intermatic dials. Any engineers who probably know what it is, like a big yellow dial with like little screws on it to do. Anybody getting this? Yeah, okay. Little screws you move around, right? So that's the pool, right? So if you need to turn the pool pump on, you have to open this little box and you have to flick a switch to turn the pump on. So you get out of the pool, somebody wants the pool pump turn on for some reason. So you've got wet hands, okay? Yeah. wet hands, and there's this metal intermatic dial, right, with some yellow paint on it, and then a little plastic flap down here, and then you're supposed to touch this, and I'm like, this is just an accident waiting to happen. 220 volts, okay? I'm like, this is not good. So one of the things I did here was to actually put an X10 switch here, which for safety reasons alone is cool, but I'm going to show you some example later of how that works. I actually use an open source program called HeyU to control X10. Again, different protocol, you'd have to find a different application, but it has a whole bunch of things it can do. Here's an example of a cron tab, if those of you know what that is, that effectively turns different lights on and off depending on whether it's getting dark, whether the pool should be on, turns all the lights off at night. To me, this is really where home automation takes off, because it's one thing to have a motion sensor, it's one thing to have like a cutesy little thing. I know there's some home automation things, like every time you get a Twitter feed, the light changes color, you know, right? That's cute, and I think it's great to show off to people, but practically not really, it doesn't really turn me on. Not that this turns me on either, but it actually is useful. And the reason it's useful is effectively I now have programmatic control of my entire house. So from a command line, from cron tab, from a shell script, I can do virtually anything. And that's really where home automation, to me, takes off. Now, I'm an engineer. I'm not expecting every homeowner to have a Unix server and connect it to X10 and start running cron jobs, but I do expect you people to do it. I don't think I'm asking too much here, okay? Because you do it for work, but you come home and there's not home automation there. Now, I'm just being facetious. To me, I found it interesting, but it is kind of cool, I think. And my family actually does like it. I'll explain why that is in a minute. But you can get an idea of kind of what's going on here. We have the ability, for example, to dim things right here, okay? This is kind of interesting. It actually goes out and it finds out how the visibility at the airport, how much cloud cover is there at the airport, and then what time is sunset, and it computes when the lights should go on in the house. Because if you have a normal thing go on at 5 p.m. or go on at 6 p.m. every day, it doesn't account for dusk, so maybe you can use a sensor, but the cool thing is it kind of actually looks at how dark it is and computes it that way. So there's some other cool stuff in here we'll talk about in a minute, but that's just sort of a sample of sort of I would call a master console that allows you to now programmatically do stuff, okay? How does the computer communicate to X10? That might be your really interesting question, like how does it get onto the wired power network? Remember, I'm using a powered network. Again, if you were using Zigbee, you would have a Zigbee controller connected to your computer. But effectively what this is here is there's the server, there's effectively a telephone wire, and this is a serial port. So to the server, it looks like a serial port. It basically plugs in. I've used a USB to serial adapter, and this is just a little serial cable that comes out. It goes into here, and this plugs into the wall, plugs into the power. And that's how it can not only send controls out, but it can detect activity coming in. That's the other issue. Not only do you want to control what's going out onto your network and turn lights on and off, but if you have any sensors in your network, you want to be able to detect those and take appropriate action in your server. So it's both in and out that you want to be able to do. This is actually what in looks like to me. Okay, this is just a log of HeyU or X10 activity, and you can see various things happening. Here's a motion sensor. Here is somebody turning a light on with a remote. So you can actually record this, and then you can create a shell script or some type of Perl script or something that is always reading that activity and taking actions based on that activity. Again, you can kind of see where I'm talking about computerized home automation, when you actually can computerize it, okay, and you can actually control it from a shell script, from Unix, from Linux, and actually sort of create your own world of control. You can do all sorts of things. So for example, it's in a loop, and all it's doing is reading the output of the log. And every time, for example, it sees somebody hit the remote bed, it's a button, it's a remote control, it turns some lights off, or it does a dusk thing, or it does a kitchen touch. Here's an example. We hit a button, a wireless button, and it actually sends a signal out to all of the terminals in the house, including the slideshow, that shows up and says, hey, we're ready to eat. And it also sends a chime to all of in different parts of the house to tell everyone you want to eat. The house is fairly large. We tried one big bell in the kitchen. You know what happened? Everyone in the kitchen became deaf, and nobody else in the other house could hear it. Okay? I used to have my server that would actually make the sound of a bell. Everyone in the office where the server is would have like a heart attack every time it went off, and then nobody else in the house could hear it. I'm like, this is not working well. So we actually got little X10 plugs that make a little chime sound, and you put them in different parts of the house, and you don't hear this huge sound in one place. You hear sort of ding, ding, and it sounds in different parts of the house. Everyone kind of hears it. They still may not come to dinner, but again, you can say you've tried. You did hear it. I didn't hear it, Daddy. Yeah, you do hear that occasionally. So my point is that you sort of, moving to step 4, we want to talk about what are we actually doing, what things do we need to look for. So you should be thinking, and when you're in terms of programming, is what are your inputs, what type of things are you looking to happen, and then what is going to be your output. And again, I'm going to kind of be going through this input-output thing pretty regular. Let me take some questions before we move to the next section. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? Do UPSs interfere with this signal? They absolutely interfere with this signal, yes. There is actually and I didn't show it, but there's actually a specific X10 isolator designed to be plugged between something like a UPS and the power system to prevent the dampening of signals, which is what the UPS is designed to do, okay, from interfering with the rest of the network. Yes. So, in fact, I do have like a filter that's there, and you have to have it. Yes, sir.
So, can you talk about if you had to start out this today, what are some choice technologies and considerations you would do instead of the X?
So that's a great question. So if I was starting out today, what would I actually do? And I've racked my brain on that one. I'm not sure actually what I would do. And the reason is because a lot of my requirements, and I'm going to go back to that earlier slide where I said, what's your cost, what's your cost profile? What type of devices do you need to interface to? And what type of actions do you need to take? So for me, I needed a 220 control for the pool. I needed some type of chimes, okay? I needed some type of remote that would send a signal into the X10 network from a remote, okay? I didn't really need light bulbs that changed colors, okay? I didn't need a lock that unlocked for me. I just didn't need that. So I looked at some of the technologies. I probably would have a hybrid system at this point. I probably would still be using some X10 because there's a lot of the devices, particularly, like an X10 chime is like $8 or something like that, right? And if I don't know anyone who makes anything like that, even at that price point. And I think what you have to do is you have to take the device, and then you have to add somehow a chime on top of the device. Whereas right now it's just a little block, it just sticks in the wall, right? The other cool thing is if the device breaks or you want to debug something, just unplug it. It's like not that hard, right? You don't have any. I had a friend who had a home automation system, and like every month he would be having to replace a switch in his house, like an outlet, because he had them in the outlets, and obviously they were very sophisticated. They broke, and he would have to rewire these things, whereas I've only had like maybe 2 devices fail in 10 years, but I don't really feel like rewiring my house to do it. If I decide I don't want X10, I just pull them out of the outlets. A couple of the wall outlets I got to do, but the switches. But in general, I would probably be doing some Zigbee stuff, although again, it has a tendency to be a lot more sophisticated than I even care about. In most cases, what I want to do is pretty simple. Turn the light on, turn the light off, dim the light, tell me somebody's hit a remote. I see a lot of the home automation today is very targeted at specific use case, like a lock. But there's very few automation systems I've seen that have sort of a breadth of sort of a toolkit approach where you've got a whole plethora of things that all talk to each other, all use the same protocol. So I don't know. I've looked at them. I've talked to some people. There's a PLC, power line control thing that's supposed to be very sophisticated. I don't know. No protocol has really, X10's on its way out, but I haven't seen any single protocol really kind of take over as being the de facto at this point. And I would like to try and avoid a hub where I've got one hub thing and I've got to interface to that hub all the time, because then I don't have computer control of it anymore in a certain way. Other questions? Yes. Benefits using power line over Wi-Fi. So the benefits using power line over Wi-Fi is simplicity of device and a low cost of device. Usually, once you do Wi-Fi, then you've got to have a very sophisticated, like I don't know how you would make a little tiny remote control that did a Wi-Fi, right? Because it would just drain too much battery, like just being on the network all the time. So a lot of it is simplicity, I think, is what drives it. I'm going to hold on questions at this point. I want to get through the applications, then we're going to come back to it. And again, I'll be up here for half an hour after. I knew that was going to be a big question. Where do you go? And I'm basically telling you, I don't know where I'd go. I know where I've been. I know how hard X10 is to get working reliably, but I don't know absolutely where the new technology is going, because I feel a lot of the new technology is very siloed. Particular applications not. And when we get to the application section, you'll see what I mean in terms of the breadth of what I wanted to do. Okay. I will close with a funny story. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article about home automation. They've had a number of home automation articles if you want to take a look. And somebody was talking about one of these light bulbs or something, and he was explaining that to turn the light bulb on, you take your smartphone and you open the app and you hit a button and the light goes on and off. And he said if we had started out with smartphone control of our light bulbs, and somebody had come along with the idea of putting a switch on the wall, we would have thought it was a genius. Okay. And that's very sobering to me, and it really tells me, it gets back to what I'm going to talk about in a minute. What kind of problem are you trying to solve? If it's cool that you're using your cell phone to turn on a light, then you can solve that. But if it's easy use, cell phone might not be the best way to turn your light on, right? And I think that's unfortunately emblematic of an industry that still has to figure out where it's going. So inputs, what type of inputs do I need? Again, we're talking about things that I want. So I want to be able to type commands at a command line, okay? I want to be able to do sort of a clock timer. I want to, you might want dawn dust sensors, wireless remotes, caller ID, telephone dialing, websites, pulling information from the internet in. And then you've got outputs, things like turning lights on, turning motors on, appliances. I'm going to talk about a coffee maker in a minute. Sounds, make sounds like the buzzing, everyone, it's time to eat. Broadcasting network information to your family, slideshow. All, again, useful things you could do. This is an example of the first floor of my house. What you see here are the circles are actual lamps or lights, okay? And again, you might need to look at this slide later and sort of pick it apart. But effectively, what we have here are different things that are happening. So, for example, we're walking through a case where right here we indicate that it's sunset, and it sends a wireless signal to a device. It then goes through the circuit breaker to a different phase. It arrives at the computer X10 interface. It goes into the computer, it comes out of the computer, and it turns on this light right there. So and this light right here, okay? So it actually is, I'm rolling 1 to 8 in how a dawn dust sensor effectively goes through the computer and then schedules an action to happen later, okay? That's an example of the dusk sensor. So let's talk about number 5. What is success? And you know, when I had this slide, I was almost going to like give you an empty slide. I was like, I'm just going to put up the question. I'm not even going to answer it to any, because there's what you think you want as success, and there's actually what success is. So you really have to define this. Again, back to that, can I turn my light on from my smartphone? Yeah, I guess. You want to, I don't know, right? So this is what success is to me. For me, success was was improving my family's home environment. That was the goal, okay? The other suggestion is to start slow, make incremental changes. I'll give you a story here. I bought some X10 stuff, and I think I had done something with X10. I don't remember what it was. The first thing I did was some particular case I needed X10 for. Very simple. And I probably went 3 months, and my wife comes to me, she said, you know, it would be nice if this X10 thing could turn on the light in the family room when it gets dark. So I'm like, yeah, I could do that. 3 weeks later, I decide I'm going to do it. Why did I wait 3 weeks? Okay? Because effectively, they had X10 in a very limited, siloed situation. Okay? That they understood and they got used to it. And then the family would say, you know, I could use this other thing. Could you make it do this other thing? And I'm like, yeah, I could do that. And 3 weeks go by because if I did it right away, I'm basically like, I'm overeager. Okay, I'm kind of like showing my hand, like, well, I want to, you know, I'm expecting we're going to have 100 devices at the end. No, of course not. Oh. So I waited a couple weeks and I put it in, and it worked. And I waited another 3 months. Okay, and then my wife comes to me. She said, oh, you know, I'd really like the outside lights to come on when it gets dusk, right? Because again, if you've ever seen the non-X10 controls, they're always very awkward. And every time you lose power, you got to, anyway, they're kind of yucky. And we have a whole bunch of lights outside, so it would take a lot of work. And I said, oh boy, I'm going to have to like bring an electrician because it's a 3-way switch, so I have to know which side is hot. There's a whole bunch of design involved in putting in X10 in a 3-way switch situation. Probably took me 2 years to do the outside lights. And finally we got a man, like, okay, good. And then the pool pump. We did the pool pump, and then we did a whole bunch of other things. So I guess my point is that when I did it in a very sort of slow way. Okay. I also accepted that some home automation tasks are just impossible. You know, there's like, well, could you make it do this? I'm like, I don't have any inputs I can really use. There's really no output that, like, I can't, there's no logic that would tell me when to do that. And you have to say, oh, I guess we can't do it. You know, you just have to accept that. Don't feel bad. There's a whole bunch of cases you can't do. But you know you're succeeded when somebody asks for more. And in fact, this Wall Street Journal article there at the bottom, smart home gadgets still hard to sell. That's not from 2 years ago or 5 years ago. That's from like 2 weeks ago. Okay? And if you read that article, you will find some very interesting statistics indicating the difficulty of really getting home automation into the home. Probably only 9% of households are interested in home automation. And that number has not changed in the past 2 years. Okay, so they do the test every year, and it's pretty much way, way low. There's a lot of people who love to sell it to you. There's not a lot of people who want to buy it. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Why? What are your challenges? Change. People don't like change. You know, I'll give you a classic example. Philadelphia, we had a smokestack next to the train station. It was used for the power station for Pennsylvania Railroad. It had been there since 1930, and it was not used. I mean, the railroad has not been generating their own electricity for a long time, okay? That's been a long time. But smokestack was still there, and they got rid of the smokestack about 18 months ago, and I'm coming down the train, and like the smokestack's gone. I'm like, where's the smokestack, right? A lot of people don't like change, even though maybe the smokestack looked hideous when it started. After it's like 7, 8 decades of smokestack, everyone's expecting that smokestack to be there. When it's not there, everyone's like, something happened. Okay? So don't expect your family to be just rushing to home automation because you think it's important. Reliable operation. people just don't, that's their home, that's their castle. They do not want unreliability. That switch on the wall works every time, folks. If you can't match that, most people aren't interested. Let's face it. They don't want complexity. Device longevity, again, if you put something in your home, particularly it's hardwired, is it going to last for the life of your home? If it isn't, are you going to be able to change it easily? You got to think of that. Maintenance, how much are you going to be able to change this thing? What's the cost? Do you have to have a server running all the time? Like I have a server running all the time in my home that does a bazillion things. So having automation added to it's not a big deal. But if you don't have a server running all the time, okay, how are you going to do this? You're going to make a little, one of those, not Arduino, but the other one, the Raspberry Pi. Yeah, you could. You got to make sure you get the serial port on there and a whole bunch of other things. You could probably do it. There's not a whole lot of power involved. But again, you have to think of that. And also security, privacy. This item here at the bottom, again, was from a week ago. Actually, I made a mistake. I'll have to fix that. The URL here and the URL here are the same, so something's wrong. Anyway, the reason that you can just search for these titles. You don't even need my thing. Nest thermostat bug leaves users cold. Anybody ever see this article? Yeah, okay. It stopped where they did a firmware upgrade, and all of a sudden, some users experienced the problem. I think some means all, I have a feeling, okay? Because if they're not given numbers, then it usually means all. Everybody got that upgrade, and they're worried about houses who maybe are not occupied or vacation residences. Now they have no heat anymore. They got to drive 450 miles to figure out what's going on. 9-step process to reboot it and get it back online. That's scary. People don't like that. So you have to offer something that makes it worth these changes and these disadvantages. So let's get to the meat. Let's talk about actual applications. Okay? And again, I'm going to run through 12 of them, but again, yours are going to be completely different. Okay? First one, telephone interface. I told you about the idea that the telephone effectively is a network. Okay? So what I do, this is unrelated to X10 at all. I just take a modem. This is a US robotics modem. Believe it or not, you can still buy these things. Okay? And as you can see, it's got a serial port. Here's where the telephone call comes in. Here's where it goes out to the computer. And we have a little loop that's always looking to see activity coming. And this is the activity. This is what the X10, this is what, not X10, this is what caller ID looks like in the raw to a modem. You basically turn on caller ID to the modem. You tell the modem, I want you to listen for caller ID. And all of a sudden you start to get these information, the date, the time, the telephone number, and the name. You can then take the telephone number, you can look it up in your address book, and bingo, you get Christine Momjian from Bruce's cell phone, and you have my telephone number right there. Okay, which happens to be on my website, so it's not secret at all. Okay, if you call it, it'll buzz in my phone, in my pocket right now. So the point is that, yeah, with 20 people calling me. The point is that I've done a couple things here. First, I've gotten information from a network. Second, I've added smarts to it by looking up the telephone number to see if it's in my address book. And if it's in my address book, this description is going to be better. My description in my address book is going to be better than what I'm getting from caller ID. And it actually comes up with this beautiful message. It shows up on everyone's terminal, and it shows up on the slideshow, and it shows up on a laptop in the kitchen with X message. Just the whole screen becomes telephone call from whatever. Right? And everyone loves it. This is my daughter's idea, the X10, the idea of coming up on the screen, because a lot of times we'll be eating dinner, lunch, somebody will call, and we'll be like, who is it, right? And some of them have, like, it'll talk to you, but that doesn't help because it doesn't check my address book, right? So everyone, like, will be eating, the phone call will ring, and we'll look over and we'll say, oh, it's X person, and right away we know exactly who it is. And we know if they're calling from their cell phone or from home, and we can call them back or whatever we want, okay? In fact, I even have the system set up so I can dial out from my address book. So I never dial the phone to call anybody. I just say Rolo and the person's name, and I say dial, call their house, call their cell phone, call their work, and just pick up the phone, and it's dialing for you. Because the modem's so happy to dial for you, right? You just need to tell it to do it. And also I have a system where if I call the house, it actually makes a little ding-dong sound. And it makes a ding-dong sound so everyone will know this is not an ordinary call, this is your husband calling, or actually any family member, it'll ding-dong. To distinguish it from an ordinary call from somebody who isn't in the family, which you're going to answer, but not maybe as quickly. So it kind of is an introduction to it. So it's a combination of the caller ID on the modem, the address book, and X10 to do the chime, and X message to send the message on the screen. I mean, it's kind of hilarious if I call my house, and I'm not going to do it now, but if I call my house, effectively what happens is, like when I'm in the hotel and I call my house and I have a terminal open, it effectively, I can see myself calling myself. Like, you know, you're seeing the terminal and saying, Bruce is calling. I'm like, yeah, I know I'm calling, I'm here. So it's kind of funny. So again, yeah, you can also dial out, and again, it's happy to do that as well, automated, okay? This is how it works. The caller ID comes in, it checks the Rolodex and then sends a chime and sends a broadcast message and logs it as well. I have all the calls that come into the house for the last like 12 years. I can pull them up. Outgoing calls, again, I'll force the system to dial directly from the address book. Second, home automation would be the first floor. So this is basically a list of all the lights we have, all the wireless remotes, the coffee maker I'll talk about in a minute, the computer. As you can see, this is pretty target-heavy, target-rich environment. This is the second floor. Again, has lights, pool pump is on the outside, obviously, different remotes in different places. So again, this didn't start at once, it kind of grew over time. You've seen pictures of these. But again, as these needs became, family member will come to you and say, I would like to have a remote that does X, I would like to have a switch that does Y, I would like this light to go on in this circumstance and so forth. And then you work with that individual to add it. And this is sort of a list of some of the devices that you have. So X10, you have a config file, you name the devices, and you can say X10 off, on, you know, family room, and all the lights go on. I have a button that turns off all the lights if we're going to watch a movie, you know, these type of things. Okay. This is what, yeah, X10 on couch, turn the couch light on. Turn these on, this is the one where if you're going to watch a video, it turns off all the lights in the area of the video. Again, the idea of using cron to do stuff, we talked about that already. This is, again, that same screen where we talked about different things happening at different times. Dawn dusk activity, what I do here is I actually go out on the internet, I find out like when sunset is, and I figure out how overcast it is, and I determine when the lights are going to go on. Okay. As I said before, X10 also already supports a remote, so there's a bunch of remote applications. This is one of the cooler applications that I've done. There's actually 7 of us in the house, so my aunt lives with us and everything. So when aunt gets up, she kind of sets the coffee maker, and then when my wife comes out of the shower, she presses that button, and the coffee maker comes on, and then by the time she comes downstairs, the coffee's ready. Okay, I'm not a big coffee guy, I drink tea, but she loves it. My aunt loves it. In fact, it's so funny because my aunt will get up and she'll kind of set the coffee, put the water in and everything, and then she'll plug it in, but there's no power to it, right? And then she'll kind of go back to her room or whatever. And when my wife presses this button, it'll turn the coffee maker on. But the problem was that my aunt didn't always know when the coffee maker went on. So there's a separate X10 chime in my aunt's room. So when she presses this button, it turns the coffee maker on, and it makes that special chime in my aunt's room, so she knows that the coffee has now been turned on, and she goes and pours it and does whatever she does, and that's her thing that she does, and she loves it, okay? If you thought that wasn't crazy enough, and this is kind of how it works, you hit the item, it turns on for I think 15 minutes, I think only, it says 30 minutes, it turns for 15 minutes, and then it turns off again, because you don't want to burn the coffee, right? So it turns it on for 15 minutes and then turns off, and that's usually enough time. If that's not crazy enough, my wife has an icon on her phone, on her mobile phone or smartphone, okay? It's connected to XV Connect, which is an Android application that does SSH with, you know, secure keys and so forth. And effectively what it does, when you press that button, it makes an SSH connection to the house, it runs the coffee command from the command line, and then it logs out. Okay, so my aunt gets her buzz, the coffee maker goes on, she arrives, and the coffee is ready. Yes, I know my wife's a princess, whatever. It's the kind of thing, it wasn't that hard to do. It makes things easier for them. Sure, why not, right? This is something you do year 10, okay? This is not something you do year 1. But as your family gets more used to it, you start to get into these type of applications. And again, the house starts to do cool things for you, okay, that you may not kind of get used to doing. So it is pretty cool. So this is how it works. The control on the smartphone uses XV Connect Bot, runs SSH, doesn't need a password because it's using an SSH key, and it runs the coffee command from the shell prompt and then logs out. Not that hard to do. Once again, all these pieces together, all of a sudden they work really well. Pool pump, I'm going to cover this a little bit. The problem with the pool pump is that it uses a lot of electricity, and you don't have to run it as much when it's cold out. When it's hot out, you got to run it a lot. So, hey, we'll just go out on the internet, we'll find the temperature outside, and based on that temperature, we'll run the pool pump for 2 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours, okay? Automatically. Just go out on the internet, what's the temperature, and then you just control it that way. And you can control it yourself. You have shell scripts you can control and so forth if you're doing something special. But again, I'm not sticking my hand in that water thing with the dial and the wires. And also I don't have to move those little knobs and get it to the right time. It's just all computer control. Family activity screen, we actually have a screen that shows like everything that's going on. So it's like a slideshow, and then the calendar, and then all sorts of activity. Again, when something has the weather, if somebody calls on the phone, if there's an event, you have all sorts of stuff sort of all together in one place, okay? We have an eat button, which is basically a button that you hit eat, and then it broadcasts. I talked about this, tells everyone it's time to eat. I'm going to give you the last one, which was actually my most hardest one. This is one I stewed about for a long time. My wife was like, when somebody comes home, can you tell me when they open the garage so I know they're coming home? Instead of them just walking in the door, like, why can't I know when a car is arriving in the garage? This is really hard. It took me a couple of years to get to the point, and I think just walking through this will give you some understanding of how bizarrely complex this is. Again, I'm running out of time, so just give me 2 minutes to wrap this up. So you have a bunch of things. You could do it with lights, motion, distance. You can do it with activation of the garage door, garage position. But you also have to take into account that somebody can be taking the trash out. That's not a car arriving. And you also have to realize somebody could open the garage door to leave, or they could do it to arrive. It's the same action, okay? So one thing I thought about was like maybe using like a detector. So here's what I ended up doing. I took the garage door, I put a switch up there near the top of the garage door, and an X10 controller. And this allowed me to identify when the garage door was open. So this is the garage. Yes, it really is that clean, believe it or not. My son, Peter, put up those shelves, which are fantastic. So basically, you have a garage, and you have 3 garage bays here, okay? And right up here, you can see there's like a little switch. I'm going to blow it up. Actually, this is probably a better shot. Okay, so this is the garage, and here's the switch. And right here is you can see a little bar. It's hard to see, but there's a little bar there, and then that connects to a switch, which connects to an X10 control, which connects to the power. So when the garage door goes up, it actually, and it's hard to see, it actually trips the switch, and the X10 identifies the switch as being closed, and it actually sends a signal to the X10 monitor. It identifies somebody came in. The problem is you don't know if they opened the door to come or go. How do you fix that? Well, you could use some kind of sensor, maybe Arduino distance sensor. And I was like, this is going to be really complicated, really expensive. So I ended up going like super simple. See that up there? That's a door sensor. See that up there? That's a magnet, okay? When they open the door, there's a wire that goes from here along the wall into an X10 sensor. So I know when the door has been opened, okay? If they open the door and then they open the garage door, they're leaving. okay? They're leaving. They're gone. If the garage door opens and nobody has opened this door for 5 minutes prior to that, they're coming home, okay? So it's the kind of case where it took me 2 years to think of it. I didn't want to get into a whole complicated thing, but it actually works. To put icing on the cake, somebody said, it would be neat if we knew who was in the car when they came home. Well, I'm like, everyone's got a cell phone, and every cell phone has a MAC address. And the way I've set up my network, every cell phone, every MAC address for every cell phone member in the house is registered to a particular host name, where I put a little DNS comment in there of whose cell phone it is. So when somebody leaves, 5 minutes later, I'm like, I had 10 MAC addresses 5 minutes ago. Have any MAC addresses disappeared in the past 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, I think? And when I identify that somebody's left and a MAC address has disappeared, they were in the car. And when they come back, I'm like, I know who's in that car because I know who was in that car when they left. And I basically say, Van has returned with Christine. Okay? And that's like the newest thing that I had kind of working. So, conclusion. This is, yeah, I know, I'm 4 minutes over, but anyway, this is sort of the scary of why you don't want home automation. But as you can see, if it's done right and it's done in a balanced way, I think it can be really powerful. And I think you as engineers certainly have the potential to do that if you want to and if you feel that your family would appreciate it. I know mine certainly has. I've enjoyed implementing it, and I know they enjoy using it. So thank you very much. I'll be up here for questions. So.